Good afternoon to everyone listening to us at home and abroad. Welcome back to the Command Center for information on St. Lucia's response to COVID-19. I am Nicole MacDonald. We are equally thankful to our partner stations on radio and on television who have been carrying simultaneously the information we have been bringing to the public. We are equally thankful to all the reporters and journalists from the various stations who have been covering St. Lucia's response to COVID-19. Yesterday, in our midday update, we spoke to Minister with Responsibility for Justice and Security, Honorable Herman Gill Francis, and of course, Acting Police Commissioner Milton Daisy. Today, we continue in the vein of law and order, and we have with us the Honorable Attorney General of St. Lucia, Mr. Stephen Julien. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for the invitation to the Command Center. Good afternoon to St. Lucians, both here and abroad. I look forward to being given the opportunity to explain this difficult period that we are going through at this juncture in our history.
Thank you very much, AG. We first want to start by letting St. Lucians know that we will be looking at some of your questions coming off the social media platform. So feel free, as you follow us, to post some pertinent questions that you would have for the Attorney General. But I want to start out, before we get into the COVID-19 response per se, to just ask the Attorney General to explain to us what it is his office does.
Well, in a nutshell, the Attorney General and the Attorney General's chambers, we serve as the principal advisor to the government, and it's all encompassing. Your contracts, if we are served in judicial proceedings, legal proceedings, you would see the Attorney General as a defendant, defending the state. It's a myriad of things, and we have a department of very capable individuals who assist the various departments of the state in keeping the government going and maintaining, most of all, the rule of law.
Thank you, AG. Of course, with the state of emergency, eyes have been on the Attorney General's chambers in the drafting of this legislation and the whole process. Right. Can you explain what is really meant by the state of emergency in the St. Lucia context? Okay.
This question may be better answered on my part if I put it in context, and if you permit me to give a short preamble.
Permission granted.
Thank you very much, milady. When the director of the World Health Organization on the 11th of March 2020, he had a press conference. And at that conference, if you permit me, as you have already agreed to, he said the following. I take some extracts out of it. He mentioned the alarming levels of spread and severity of inaction and the levels of inaction on the part of governments worldwide. He characterized the COVID-19 as a public health emergency of international concern and characterized it as a pandemic. He said that they had never before seen a pandemic sparked by coronavirus. And this was the first pandemic that was getting that sort of treatment. And most of all, he called every day for countries to take urgent and aggressive action. And he went further to say, we have rung the alarm bell loud and clear. And we have, in the structure, you have the World Health Organization, you have PAHO for Pan American Health Organization, and first in the Caribbean you have CARPHA, and locally we have the CMO. So they have been following, and likewise the administration, what had been happening globally, and this response from this advice rather from the Director General of the World Health Organization would have triggered a response locally by way of advice to the Prime Minister and what have you. It is based on this that we would have taken the next step and consulted with our Governor General, Sir Neville Snack, and it is based on this that you would have the proclamation come out. And by what I mean the proclamation This is a formal instrument by which the Governor General, as per Section 17 of the Constitution, would declare that a state of emergency exists. And by that proclamation, he would have satisfied himself based on the advice of the technocrats. That's the CMO and the health experts in our space, that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of, and in our case, the outbreak of pestilence or infectious disease. And in a nutshell, that is what would have happened. The action of the Governor General, having taken the advice and sought the advice of the technocrats, would have determined that we need to respond for the preservation of life in St. Lucia. So in a nutshell, this is what the activity involved around the proclamation by the Governor General would entail.
Okay, let me just pull some questions from what the layman has been saying, AG, that St. Lucia is not at a level yet. We only have 3 cases, 2 have gone back. We have 1 case here, she's recovering. Some persons have been asking, are we at the point, should we have waited for some kind of spread for there to be a state of emergency? How would you respond to that?
Well, this is a fair question, and I will again revert to what the Director General, Dr. Tedros, said. And we have called every day for countries to take urgent and aggressive action. So do we decide to be Italy and what's happening there, this scourge called coronavirus 19, or do we take example from our friends from Taiwan? Do we wait until it is literally knocking at our door, or do we wait before it arrives at our shore to the extent that I saw only this morning in New York, where the healthcare workers are repurposing, and I'm using this fancy word, garbage bags into protective gear. We know our resources, so I think we have done, and I am convinced that the state has done the responsible thing in trying to curtail any spread beyond the level that it is currently at. Okay. And this is what we have been implored to do by the technocrats, the healthcare workers, from within the region and from within our shores. We need to take these preemptive steps.
So we saw the declaration that was gazetted by the Governor General. We also saw that the government went to Parliament the next day for the state of emergency and for the Emergency Powers Disaster Act. Right. Can you explain to us why that was necessary?
Right. So having made that declaration and the proclamation from the Governor General, it was duly published in an extraordinary publication of the Gazette, so there's the notice aspect of it. It would now be incumbent, as per the Constitution, the provisions of the Constitution, for there to be an approval of that action. And if nothing was done, it would have lapsed after 7 days. Okay. But we would have had to have made a determination, and we brought it to Parliament, as is prescribed by the Constitution, for the House of Assembly, Upper and Lower House, to consider a resolution to approve the order. And once that is done, you need another resolution which would require the order, which would operationalize the state of emergency under the Emergency Powers Act. So if we have those in place, you would then have the framework by which you could have your curfew, you could do all these other things that you need to do to protect the citizenry from the coronavirus, or the spread rather.
So the Emergency Powers Act was specific to COVID-19?
In this particular case, yes.
Okay, so that's why the legislation was necessary.
Correct.
So everything in there is tailored to our response to COVID-19.
That is correct.
Okay. We know that the Prime Minister did indicate that there was consultation, discussions with the opposition. How involved were you in that with regard to the legislation and our discussions with the opposition?
Well, the consultation was actually quite broader than that, actually, because I was present when the NEMAC grouping they met, and at those fora, we took the opportunity to make notes of what the various parties were looking for in terms of the need, and this would have been condensed into this final order. So there was that level of consultation, and I must indicate at this point as well that the chambers, Attorney General's chambers, we anticipated that at some point, if this thing, because we too have been observing what's happening globally, so we stood in a state of readiness. So as much as it may have appeared between Friday and Tuesday, a lot happened, that we had started the process of getting everything prepared in the event that we were to cross that threshold. So there's a level of preparedness that came through with my director of drafting, my senior Crown Counsel, and those various parties, of course, the Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Emmanuel, and with consultation with other members as to what lay ahead. Because we knew that at some point, it would have been triggered at an instant, and we had to stand ready. So this is part of the preamble. But having done so, and we got everything sorted out by Monday, it took some effort. We took the step of consulting directly with the leader of the opposition. I think I'm allowed to say that because it was stated in Parliament, and we went through the process. He had certain concerns, and there were areas which were clarified, and we made some amendments. So it was an open discourse. And further to that, even the briefing notes that was used by the Honorable Prime Minister was shared. So there were no surprises. Mm-hmm. And especially in terms of the timelines, we knew that we wanted to get everything done on Tuesday. Hence the sitting of the the lower house in the morning, and about midday, I think the upper house sat, the Senate. So
and, yeah, yes. We actually did see in Parliament that both the opposition and the government came together on this COVID-19 response and the legislation that was necessary for it. I wanted you to tell me, AG, a little bit about the behind the scenes, because we know there's a lot of people in the AG's chambers who are working very hard. Can you give us an idea of what goes into the preparation of such legislation in such a short period of time?
It took a Herculean level of effort on our part, and I take no credit for it. Most of it lies at the feet of my senior Crown Counsel. We have Mr. Williams, we have my Solicitor General, Mrs. Portland Reynolds, and of course the Director of Legislative Drafting, Ms. Julien Vidal-Jules. We put everything together. We got the instructions. We understood the ramifications of the action. So this wasn't something that we took lightly, because at the end of the day, there will be discomfort, and you want to minimize it. But I recall at some point, and I think I said that to a senior technocrat this morning, that I recall a judge saying that the best decision is one where neither party goes home happy. It is impossible to satisfy all the interests, but the greater good has to be preserved, and which is the protection of life and limb. And we put, having that initial concept at the table, we sat in and we tailored this for our St. Lucian context. So there are certain things in there that you will not see anywhere else.
Yeah. And in his statements to the House, the Prime Minister did explain that there were specific issues that were happening with our quarantine facilities, with people not obeying the rules in terms of social distancing, which had in effect caused the government to do this in order to support the work of our chief medical officer and obviously to support our police. And yesterday when Commissioner Daisy was here and Minister Francis, they did explain how important the legislation was for the carrying out of their duties. Can you give us an idea, AG, of how long the state of emergency remains in effect? Yes,
thank you. The state of emergency will lapse, that's the language that is used, on the 26th of April, if nothing is done to continue it. Because you have the ability to extend it for 12 months. But you have to return to Parliament and get permission so to do. With regard to the need for it as well, I must highlight that for the purpose of enforcement, it is less for the law-abiding and more about those who at some point determine that they will operate above the law and serve the self-interest. So yes, you may believe that there'll be an infraction on the right thinking person without the need for a curfew. Most stayed home from 11 o'clock. But there will be some, when approached, would believe that their rights are being infringed and there is no reason for them to comply. And it is for that reason that we had to take those extraordinary measures as well. And we're learning from those countries who took, as was stated, I believe, by Minister Francis yesterday in his interview. I had the rare opportunity to listen in on the shows yesterday. And he said sometimes you have to take the harder stance to get persons to comply. And I think this is one of the ways by which we could have accomplish that end. This was the only way for persons who want to come into the state through what the bays and the quays along the eastern coast, knowing full well that they are at risk, the risk in their family, their families are now at risk, their communities and so on. Of course, they're thinking, well, I can't speak to their motive, but at the end of the day, the state has to do what is in the interest of the entire citizenry. So if it means that that right will have to be suspended or it has to be enforced, so be it. I hope no one wants to go into the custody suites.
As you brought up the issue of what was said yesterday at the briefing that we had, AG, one of the issues that came up was the passports. And there was a question from online regarding the confiscation of persons' passports. Can you speak to that issue? When they went into quarantine, I think the passports were taken for a while just so the relevant authorities could get the information, but persons online were saying that if indeed a passport should not be taken from a regular person. So
let me advise everyone, you look at the small print in your passport and you'll see that it is the property of the government of St. Lucia. So if it belongs to me, I have a right at any time to ask you to produce it so I could have it examined. So be that as it may, I think it was very responsible for the authorities to ascertain identity. We have had at different points issues with regard to fraudulent travel documents and what have you. So I believe that this was the right thing to do. You would get biometric information on individuals that they may not otherwise be able to produce. And the order provides for that. So if the CMO or the agents of the CMO require that you identify yourself and give this information, why not? Yeah. And I'm not aware of any situation where it has been retained. So I hope people use good sense in the circumstances. We need that sort of information.
Okay. With regard to the Emergency Powers Act and the specific things that are in there, AG, can you give us an idea of the specific powers that are outlined in the legislation and maybe a few examples of where it might be used?
in the order?
Yes, well, we know there's measures in there regarding social distancing,
correct,
regarding quarantine, regarding certain things the Prime Minister is allowed to do. Is there anything specific you can give us in terms of those measures and maybe some examples of where the Prime Minister would have been able to use or has used it already?
Well, here's an example. You have the power. We have not gone to that stage, but if at any point there'll be a need for requisitioning, you have the need for the curfew and the like, then certainly the Prime Minister would, well, the Minister of Responsibility under the order, who is the Prime Minister, would have that capacity by way of notice to do certain things. But here's an example. We have this tremendous humanitarian gift from the government and people of Cuba. And on short notice, and of course, we must also mention the Cayman Islands for having facilitated the transport across, where they now need to get boots on the ground. The nurses and the doctors, under ordinary circumstances, under the normal circumstance, would need to go through this thorough process of accreditation that could sometimes take a month. With this order, these individuals within days could be on the ground providing the relief and the support. I say relief because we must also factor in that some of our healthcare professionals are in the process of the transition from VH to OKEU. Then you have others working at the quarantine center at Rodney Bay facility rather, and you have at the Grosile Polyclinic and around the island you have the need. These persons may well be exhausted, and we may need them refreshed if this thing escalates, to be on the ground giving that level of support. So we needed to get these Cubans in, and we have in fact currently working on a regime that will be a happy regime, because we have the local accreditation bodies, and to get them working. So by way of a simple order, and the Emergency Powers Act gives the minister, the Prime Minister, the power to abridge or shorten rather the processing time for an exam in a case like this.
Okay, we have seen AG, even with the state of emergency and with the statements made by the Prime Minister in terms of St. Lucia's response, some St. Lucians not obeying those orders. We have seen some businesses open that don't fall under the essential services list. What can the government do or law enforcement do in that regard?
Well, you have the issues of social distancing and what have you. They could go in and do what they need to do, close the doors. So this again is about public health. So the operator can be detained. So this is something that is very serious, and the authority which has the capacity to go in and enforce it at the ground level are our police officers, the members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. So if they come in and indicate that you are running afoul of the order, you must comply. Otherwise, there will be consequences. And I hope for the greater good that patrons and the operators of these establishments do the right thing.
We've also received information, and obviously the police commissioner spoke to it yesterday, of persons transporting people illegally, especially from the neighboring island of Martinique. How closely does your office work with the police on such matters, if at all?
Well, we are always available as the principal legal advisor to the government. Whenever the need arises, we speak with the the acting commissioner of police, in this case, Mr. Daisy. I also had a very good rapport with Mr. Moshiri, and we made ourselves available for that sort of open dialogue. I listened to him, and I concur with everything that he said, including the aspect of the protection of those officers who are going to put themselves at risk to intercept those individuals who are engaging in that sort of behavior. And I'd like to use this forum to plead with them that those persons who are engaging in that sort of activity to desist, and desist immediately. I would prefer that our police officers, the members of the correctional services, our firemen, are otherwise deployed, and if they get some downtime, to be with their families. So people ought to do, the examples out of Italy is a stark reminder of what's going on in the rest of the world, and we see what's happening with Louisiana as of this morning. It's now fast becoming the next epicenter for the outbreak. Over 100 persons died in one of the quarters last evening. So within the past 24 hours, I stand corrected on that. But this is what can happen. Can you imagine a small community with one of these smallest villages and what have you, the outbreak in one house, and this would be a calamity. Yeah. So we hope good sense prevails.
Yeah, final few questions, AG. With regard to the spreading of false information, this has been a severe problem all over the world, not just St. Lucia, especially with regard to Facebook, WhatsApp, voice notes, things going around. What recourse does a state have in dealing with persons who spread such fake information which causes such panic and damage?
Well, ordinarily you have recourse to the Computer Misuse Act, but for our purposes, there is a process. So you can't prosecute unless the DPP gives permission and everything along with it. You need these technocrats out in the field. But we've recognized that, and in the order, the COVID Emergency Powers Disasters COVID-19 order, that's number 42 of 2020, those who have their order in hand, at section 21, and that is one of those where I had some discourse and made an amendment with the leader of the opposition, Mr. Pierre. In it says that a person shall not publish or cause to be published, posted or reposted over a media platform inclusive of social media any purported news or report or purported statement of fact, knowing or having reasonable cause to suspect that the news, report, or statement, A, is untrue or false, and B, may incite public fear, panic, or ethnic hatred. So I think that captures everything. And so some are so ludicrous that persons dismiss it. But when, for instance, I had a friend who's a St. Lucia national who returned home and was unaware of what's going on so much locally. I think you may have heard about this helicopter thing where people are saying helicopters will be spraying down.
Yes.
And he called me in a panic. He was indoors and was wondering whether he would have to close his windows, and that is the sort of behavior, irresponsible behavior, that can have consequences. In ethnic hatred, do we start, or does someone publish something that would cause people to go down to the city of Castries and start attacking anyone who fit the profile of a certain ethnic group? Again, people, this is a very a platform that can be used for the greater good, or, as in the case, cause mayhem. And people will be held accountable for it. The penalties, of course, you have the detention aspect, where if someone is, the commissioner, the members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force can do certain things, But beyond that, there's a penalty, the general penalty of section 24. It speaks of imprisonment with or without hard labor for a term not exceeding 6 months, or a fine not exceeding $1,000, or both, and the forfeiture of goods or money in respect of which the offense has been committed. So there's the deterrent aspect of it. But at the end of the day, I want to repeat, do the right thing. This is not the time for that sort of irresponsible behavior. And worse still, when you find out that the authors of that sort of irresponsible news items and so on, fake news, that's what they call it.
Yes.
Yeah. Are adults, are mature persons. Some of them are parents. This is not the sort of example or behavior. I'm told Amazon, is it Amazon, with the free books, audio books?
Amazon, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Go and read a book.
Yes.
Engage in some constructive activity. Learn something new. Spend time with your family. Not that sort of behavior. That is very irresponsible, very un-Saint Lucian.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it definitely does damage to our country, and that's what we have to think about when we continue to spread such things. As we wrap up, AG, I just want you to once again just stress to St. Lucians why we needed to put through this type of declaration, legislation, why it was necessary as we wrap up.
Yes. Thank you, Nicole. I would like to implore, to beg every St. Lucian to consider what the consequence would have been had we not taken that action. I say we, it wasn't done, yes, the proclamation was by our Governor General, but the approval and the extension and the powers that came with it, including the curfew, was done by the people who had been elected or appointed to represent us in the House of Assembly, upper and lower house. We understand that there is no vaccine. There is the best vehicle by which we can control the spread, if control is the word to be used in this context, is the isolation practices of the social distancing, the hand washing and what have you. But we had to close our borders. We had to stem the tide of those individuals who unknowingly would have been vectors, carriers of that scourge onto our island. We understand with our limited resources that this is the best opportunity, the best tool that was available to us to accomplish this end. The actions of the technocrats, the chief medical officer, the technocrats in the Ministry of Health, the Commissioner of Police, the Honorable Prime Minister, was predicated on facts. And we are doing the best that we can in the time being. We have taken it. We had the opportunity to go to almost to the end of the year. 12 months would take us to next year about this time. But we thought it prudent at this juncture to stay the course, see what happens on the 26th. If nothing changes, there is a possibility that we'll have to return to Parliament. I pray that this doesn't happen, that some formula is devised by which we could curtail its spread. But in the meantime, and as I said earlier, I would prefer, and I think every right-thinking St. Lucia would prefer to have taken the route as used by Taiwan, rather than a lax one as has happened in places like Italy, and also China in the early days. But I think this is by way of the proclamation of the state of emergency. I think this action was well justified, and the legislative framework which existed under the Quarantine Act, the Public Health Act, which I've heard persons invoke over this period of time. I could tell you as we speak that the Quarantine Act is going to be replaced. It is woefully inadequate. It's a piece of legislation which was enacted, I think, in 1946 or thereabout, and was specific to that period. So you hear about yellow fever and that sort of thing. But for our purpose, the concept of social distancing didn't even exist around that time. Under the Public Health Act, you see penalties as low as $48. So we need easy. So there's and I had indicated earlier, we did not try to cross that path on Monday. This was an action which was thoroughly researched by my office and agreed to the format in which it would take. And I ask and I urge persons to be patient. It will produce the results that we are looking for, because we have nothing else by which we could avert any incoming disaster. This was the best tool available to us as a nation to stem the tide. It's at 3. Let's hope it doesn't increase, but if it does, we have the controls in place.
Thank you very much, AG. I think we went through a lot of issues and answered a lot of the questions that persons have been asking regarding the state of emergency. Of course, I want to thank you for all your hard work in this situation. We want to thank the AG's chambers as well. I know you have a hard-working team there, and everyone that assisted in what has transpired over the last few days. So thank you very much, Honorable Stephen Julien, for being with us this afternoon. I want to thank everyone listening to us at home and abroad once again. Of course, I need to continue to thank our partner stations. The media have been very supportive in terms of carrying the factual information coming out of the Government Information Service and coming out of the Ministry of Health. We also want to always thank those who are on the front lines, our doctors, our nurses, our policemen, our firemen. You know, we need to obey them. We need to follow their direction. We want to thank all those persons working in our supermarkets, in our pharmacies. You know, this is a very tough time for our nation, and we must always remain humble and thankful to those people on the front lines. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to stay home and stay safe.